welcome to this meeting of the Curriculum and Evaluation Committee. It is Monday, December 9th, 2024. We're here in the Nashua North Boardroom, and let's do attendance first, or do the roll. Ms. Giglio.
Here.
Ms. Prin.
Here.
Mr. Claffey is here. Dr. Andrade is here. Mr. Posca is here. And tonight we have two items on the agenda. First of all, we have changes and proposed courses for the upcoming program of studies at the high school. And then we have some updates on elementary data, presentation on elementary data. So Dr. Andrade, I'll turn it over to you. And we have Mr. Posca. I don't think I introduced Mr. Posca tonight.
So I'll hand it over to Mr. Posca, but we're going to invite up our two directors of guidance from each high school to review the proposed changes in the program of studies.
So as Ms. Kate Marquardt from Nashua High School North and Ms. Laurie Kudu from Nashua High School South come up to present. Every year we go through this, we meet with I meet with the guidance directors along with the principals who've worked with their teams at their schools for updates for the upcoming 25-26 school year. Because believe it or not, right after the Christmas break, we start planning for scheduling for the next school year. So it's important that we have this in place. I'm going to kick it over to Ms. Marquardt, Ms. Kutu to kind of go through the updates and the changes that they're proposing at this time.
Okay. You want me to start with music? So we have one minor change to in the music and art department with music theory. It was just a prerequisite change to add teacher recommendation in order to help the teachers know which students can read music. It's a more advanced course and looking for students with a few, reading music, things under their belt in order to get through the course. So just minor there. Mm-hmm.
As we continue to go forward, we had some changes for NTC. I want to talk a little bit about those. Actually, before we go on, Mr. Claffey, as they go through this, if there's any questions that you or the members have, certainly feel free to chime in and try to clarify some of those changes if there are any, okay?
I guess on the prerequisite for the music, any concerns about numbers? Would you be denying some students access?
I don't think so. I think that the challenge is you really have to be able to read music to take this course. You have to have an understanding. And so for kids to get into the course who don't read music, they would really not be successful. So
that's fair.
So the next changes are in our Nashua Technology Center. The first two changes go together. We're adding a course called Advanced Digital and Media Production and Advanced Cinema Production. These courses are going to replace our full year course called Video Production and Broadcasting, so that students can go in individual tracks. So they can go more of the production route or more of the cinema route. So these two courses will only be semester long instead of the full year course. Yes.
Same instructor?
Same instructor.
Taking this?
Yep.
And we know how recognized he's been, how often he's been recognized for, with a few exceptions, for example, the documentary he made with Dr. Andrade. Other than that, we won't hold that against him, but his other work with students.
There's another one coming up.
But release date?
January, we're working on it right now.
The next course is in cybersecurity. This is the third course in the sequence of courses. We've offered cybersecurity 1 and 2, so we're adding the third course for next year. It's a semester course and is open to junior and seniors. Any questions?
You have an instructor lined up for that?
We do.
Nice.
And then next is a a course called Computer Systems Design. This is a new course. It's open to grades 9 through 12. And it will replace it's a bridge course, I guess, to computer networking. So students in any grade will be able to take this first introductory step to computer systems design and then move on to computer networking 1, which is going to be only a semester-long course. So students might take both in the same year, or they might take, one before. There's no prerequisite, so they might take one and the next one, or one or the other.
I just, what's the current graduation requirement for computers?
A half credit.
Half credit.
And then because we've added these courses, we're taking away some courses. So video production 2 will now be retired because we have the 2 courses. We're retiring desktop publishing just because over the last couple of years, we've had very low enrollment in that class. And we're taking away the advanced accounting topics class. We're finding that most of our students go from college accounting 1 right into college accounting 2. So this course is no longer necessary.
Do the last one. Any questions there? And then we have, our 2 last changes are in the science department. So our first change is to AP Physics 1. It's just a description, an addition to the description here about earning credit. So AP Physics 1 and AP Physics C are taking place at the same time. So the kids can't get credit for both courses. So that was the description change there.
Can you just say a little more about, like, it's taking place at the same time? Like, is it in the same section, same classroom? And is this an AP decision or is it a Nashua decision?
This is a Nashua decision in order to run both courses. We can run the content at the same time, and students usually pick C or 1. AP Physics C is more of an engineering route, a mechanic route, so kids interested in engineering would go the Physics C route, where kids just interested in getting that college physics out of the way might do the Physics 1 route.
Yeah, that was just a question that came up, and I know it's going to come up again. So I just wanted to put it on the record. Thanks.
And this was partly a result of adding AP Physics 3 or last year?
Physics C last
Physics
year.
C. So we added that last year. It's running now, and this is like a tweak.
Yes, just a little tweak.
Cheryl, did we cover that? Okay. Yep, go ahead. So this is the head department head from North. I back up. Yeah. Make sure we're saying all the right things.
Just to clarify, that's completely correct as far as adding C last year and so making this tweak. It's essentially the same content in terms of the concepts. AP Physics 1 is algebra-based and AP Physics C is calculus-based. They're truly in the same course, learning the same concepts, but then the mathematical problems are differentiated. So that's why it would make sense to take one or the other.
Okay. Thank you, Cheryl.
And you might see bigger enrollments in the 1, right? If you attract more algebra students, and which would be great. Can't have enough science.
Oh my God.
Oh, yep. And then our last one also in science. So we have a name change from physical science to conceptual physics and chemistry. So we'll be working with the same course numbers. The description has changed a little bit, but the name is now conceptual physics and chemistry. It would meet the physical science course graduation requirement. We have had a lot of science changes with the biology, so kids coming in as freshmen can take either biology or physical science. So I think this is sort of just in response to that sort of changing demographic there.
So when was physical science no longer mandated in 9th grade? I didn't know students had the option.
Oh.
Sorry.
No, that's okay.
I promised I wouldn't ask. I'm just curious, because I remember everybody had to take it, and it's been a while.
So I think we're into our 3rd year. So 2 years ago, we made the change. for multiple reasons. So it's been a gradual switch to have biology be the consistent freshman class for all students to take. So next year will be the first year that all students take biology, and then they have an option to go straight to chemistry. Or we also are trying to make physical science more of an applied science and less math heavy, so that's the conceptual physics and chemistry. We plan to still offer that at all levels, so a student who maybe is an honors student but is more interested in the humanities might be satisfied with a conceptual physics and chemistry, while someone who is more science-bound might really want to rush into chemistry and physics and the AP Science courses. It gives a lot more flexibility for students to really follow their interests and get to. We also have a lot of science electives. We made the change at the same time that we also added a third credit for the science experience credit. So there were quite a few changes a couple of years ago.
I think it's coming back. There used to be a state test that, on physical science, right? And you don't have to worry about, you haven't had to worry about that for a while.
Well, we still have the SAS tests as juniors.
As juniors,
Yeah.
but I just remember they pushed it up to get students ready, I thought. But who cares? That's over, done. Just reminiscing about the old high school days.
Thank you.
Those are all our changes, so thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you
just
for
have-
Ms. Messick.
I just have one question. Is this now, are you all set to present the programs for next school year? Are these the changes that are going to happen? There won't be any more?
Correct. No more
Not
changes.
for next year.
Thank you.
Thank you, and I guess I'd be looking, for any, you all ready? All right. I'd be looking for a motion, recommendation to approve the 2024-2025 Program of Studies, changes, additions.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Thank you very much. The motion passes or carries. We'll be sending it to the full board next week.
Excellent. At this time, I'd like to call up our elementary team. If I can have Principal Cerrone, Principal T-Boom, and then our two science coaches, Monica Tino and Patty Davison. And we have some data to present for you. You want to slide on the other side? So the team will go through. So just a little background before we get into our science data, as well as a little work on our ELA. Just a brief overview of our district SAS over the last 3 years. As you can see in our ELA in 22, 23, and 24, we are making progress. I mean, it's 41, 42, and 44% over the last couple of years. In math, 32, 34, as well as 34, and then in science, 28, 27, and 27. So we know there's absolutely we have work to do across the board. But we also just wanted to, again, acknowledge all the good stuff that is going on. This is a little more information breaking down subcategories and areas that we need to look at, both in ELA and math, and where our targets are for our economically disadvantaged subgroups, our ELL, and our special education students, and the work that we still need to do. And then a little more information around our subgroups, around our students who are the difference between our white students, multiple races, Hispanic, Black, and how each subcategory is performing. And then a little more information around our grade level data. So from the previous slide, you saw that the district is around 44 percent, and then this at each grade level, our overall kind of proficiency. And there was a conversation a couple of months ago around our middle school data, if you remembered, right? And so we can see how our elementary schools are consistently around starting out at 46. I'm just looking at the math side right now. 46, 43, 36, 28, 31, 27, right? And so the question is why? Why is our third grade scores the highest across the board? And then what happens, and that's a curriculum issue and something that we need to really review. And then similarly on the ELA side, we see our elementary schools really outperforming our middle school data. So again, what is that vertical articulation? How are the standards being addressed from 3 through 5, and then that translation into the middle school. So I just wanted to unpack a little here on how each grade is doing. Any questions on looking at subcategories or big grade level? I didn't, we can get more into how each elementary school is performing, but I really, a lot of our conversations, it's moving the system. So we can look at Bicentennial, who's around 70% proficient in ELA, and then Dr. Crisp is, in the 20s and 30s. However, we need to be having those conversations on what does third grade curriculum look like? How do we move that system as opposed to the schools? Because we should have the same expectations at Dr. Crisp as we do at Bicentennial and Maine Dunstable. Yep.
I have a question. This would have been really helpful to have had in our packet that we could have looked. For me, it might be my age, but I need to look at things maybe more than once. And so this was not part of our packet, whereas the high school programs were. So I got a chance to really look at those. Will this be available to us after the meeting?
Yep, I'm going to share it with you, absolutely.
Okay, okay, great, thank you.
And then I'm going to turn it over to Monica and Patty and talk a little bit.
Bryn-
Yeah, sorry.
So are those the SAS scores just from this last year?
Yes.
And I have no idea if you would even know the answer to this, but I noticed in grade 6, both in ELA and math, there's a huge dip in scores. Do we think that's just because of the transition to middle school?
So it's consistently a big dip from 5th grade to 6th grade. And then also a dip in 6th grade to 7th. More locally in our 7th grade than across the state. So, but right across the board in almost every middle school that we looked at, there's a dip from 5th grade to 6th grade. And there's some of it we believe is just the way that content is being taught. At the elementary, you're in a group, it's much more applied. In middle school, you're on a team, you have a math teacher. And so a lot of that reteaching or that transference to independent work, it was taught, but did the students learn it? And then again, were students able to transfer the work from the classroom onto the state assessment? Also in 6th grade, the testing, a big one is fractions, especially in math. So that's a strand that we have to pay more attention to. That's a lot more critical thinking and in number sense at that point. That's being assessed in 6th grade. Does that answer some? Yeah. But that's middle school is, when we present the middle school data, like it's a traditional dip in middle school. And it's not only Nashua. Mr. Posca was a middle school principal for 14, 15 years, and it was consistent in his school as well.
Forgive me if you said this, the vertical line with the percentage after, what is it? What are those percentages?
So those are our targets.
Targets,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
that's okay.
So when they're looking at our subcategories, we would look at the targets that we would need to meet. So we'll hand it over to science. I'll stop driving.
Okay, sorry. So we have been implementing a new resource for the past few years now. In 5th grade, they've had it now. This is their 5th year with Amplify Science. In 3rd and 4th grade, it's their 3rd year. And this is the first full year for grades K1 and 2 for implementation. So it has been kind of a staggered implementation. So when we're looking at the data, some things to consider are that when teachers took the Amplify Science curriculum, they were also starting to teach new standards. They were looking at the NGSS standards, which also dictate kind of how we're supposed to teach science as well, not just what we're supposed to teach in science. So they took on a new pedagogy, new standards, and a new resource all at the same time. So when we look at data, it's just kind of some things to consider. The other thing is that when we look at schools, they're small sample sizes. So if you see a big dip in a school, like for example, one year it's very high, the next year it's very low, the next year it's very high, it might only be 40 kids that were sampled at that time. So it's, something to consider when you're looking at from school to school. One of the years is the remote learning year for our implementation, so that's something to take into consideration. Elementary teachers have also been adopting several new programs, so science isn't the only one. Another thing to look at is teacher turnover. Just because it's the 5th year of Amplify Science in 5th grade doesn't mean that every student in the district has a teacher that's been using it for 5 years. They might have a teacher that's brand new or using this resource for the first time. And the other thing to consider is that staggered implementation. So we put this together just to kind of give you an idea. So for example, a student in the 5th grade, because we take the science SAS in 5th grade, in 2024, you can look down there in that last column and you can see that for 5th grade, they used Amplify Science. For 4th grade, they used Amplify Science. Before that, in grades 1 through 3, they used Mystery Science. Their grade 1 was 2/3 of a year long, and their grade 2 was a remote year. In kindergarten, we didn't have a resource at that time. So, last year's results, they only had Amplify Science for 1 year. So even though in 5th grade we've had it for 5 years, our data aren't going to quite show the results of having this great resource. So this is the last 3 years of the science SAS, 22, 23, and 24. I decided to just leave the remote year off. So you can see here, if you look from school to school, you see some big dips, you see a lot of even lines. So if we look down at the all the way to the right, that's the average of all 12 elementary schools together, and you can see it's pretty consistent. If you were to look at year 21, we didn't take it in 21, we took it in 20, I can't even remember. But even before we had the next gen science standards the tests were based on them, the results were still pretty similar. That said, they're not that great. So we do have some room for improvement, and that's what we're going to talk about next.
Just before we move on, can you just explain a little bit of the next generation science standards? What's been the big switch?
So the big switch with the standards is really how we're teaching science. It's 3-dimensional learning. Students are not just doing activities in class. That's one of the science practices, for example. They're doing a lot of other things. They're scientific argumentation. We also have the cross-cutting concepts where students are thinking like scientists. Each unit has a focus cross-cutting concept and a focus science and engineering practice. And then the disciplinary core ideas are the content, so it's what we're used to thinking of science, but that's just 1 out of 3 components that the way that we're teaching now, we have all 3 components and they're all equally as important. And what's amazing about it is the progression that the students have. They're learning things more in depth and then building on that later. So it's kind of amazing to see.
Thanks for highlighting that, because I think it's really important. It's not just memorization and identifying. So it's more about cause and effect, right? It's the the relation between the connections before the 4 domains in science, and again, that the science and engineering practices, it's the application of it, which is a lot more hands-on, and as opposed to sitting and getting, it's really the application of science and making connections in that thinking.
Absolutely.
Can I ask a question, I think related to this? Has the state test become closely aligned with the national standards in your new curriculum? Because I'm wondering if you're emphasizing, say, inquiry and thinking outside the box, does the state test capture gains in that kind of intellectual progress?
The NGSS came out in 2013, and the state of New Hampshire, we have since adopted them as a state and also as a district in Nashua. But the state tests started using them in 2018. So the state tests are aligned with the next gen
So
science
that's
standards.
clearly the test. You obviously you don't want to teach the test, but you want to be able to measure progress, and unfortunately, that's how it's measured.
Correct.
Yeah, and so just, again, if we went back a couple of slides, again, just moving systems, right? And so you just saw the application. So NGSS comes out in 2013, right? The state test changes in 2018, right? And now you can see our resources and our access of good instruction, and we'll get into a couple of slides, high quality professional development around science, and just the change in the transformation when we were in school, maybe we got 1 or 2 science classes, right? And now we're expecting our kids to go much deeper into the scientific engineering thinking, right? And that's not typically the forte of elementary teachers. We're likely enough to have incredible coaches, but you could see even the transference of a mystery science to an amplify science, and so in that consistency. So I think that's also reflected into the fidelity of programs and deeper learning going on in the classrooms.
So as we said, we have some work to do for science, and we like to think about, what are we doing with all this data that we're collecting? So the teachers obviously are collecting data at the classroom level every day when they're working with their students. And then at the district level, we collect the end of unit assessment data for grades 3 to 5 right now. And then we, as coaches, are offering a lot of support, especially to our K-1-2 teachers. We're doing a lot of implementation coaching cycles, regular coaching cycles, professional development opportunities. At the classroom level, the teachers, Amplify Science provides formative assessments in almost every lesson. They call them on-the-fly assessments, and they have clipboard tools, but we use those to create these assessment trackers for each of all of the units so that the teachers would be able to keep notes on their individual students, how they're moving along that progress build, and then that also gives them information about the next day's lesson and where they're at with their instruction. So that's the formative assessment. And then the summative assessment at the end of the unit, they have their data that they provide to the district, and then the grade levels are using that data to evaluate their students' progress and the unit and the implementation of that, and then hopefully adjusting their instruction for the next unit. And then as a district, we'll use that information to evaluate the curriculum materials after they've been in place. Any questions about science?
I hate to ask this, but do you know how many days a week is science taught every day? Is it one of those where you teach a chunk of science, then you go into social studies, teach a chunk of science, or is it every day, all year long? Is it expected to be taught?
So we right now are working on 3 days of science, 2 days of social studies. You know, sometimes you might have a teacher that has a social studies unit, they want to put it all together, or even a science unit because we want to finish it in a timely manner or something like that. But pretty much we try to stick to 3 days of science, 2 days of social studies. And that's ample time to go through all of the units and amplify science.
How many units are there for each grade? Is it like three units per year, or?
Grades K1 and 2 have 3, so they have 1 a trimester, and there are about 22 lessons a unit. And grades 3, 4, and 5 have 4 units.
Okay. Is there, like, information to know what units they're gonna be learning in each grade level? I'm just curious to know what they're learning about.
Yeah, we definitely have that scope and sequence.
We
could
would
share.
love to see that.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
I'm dying, how many days a week do you teach science, Ms. Brand?
I try to do it 5 days a week if I can, or if I have a double specialist, though.
Third grade?
Third grade, yeah.
Thank you very much, I think. I'm still hung up with the whole COVID, lost ground, lost time, and if I were to ask you to bet on which grade did the best, K through, not, well, 1 through 5, I would bet on third grade. And I'm looking at the years that they would have been in school versus the years that a sixth grader would have lost time in school. And if I did this right, the third graders have had pretty much 3 full years, because they were tested at the end of third grade last year, is that right? But they would have been here for in-person instruction for 3 years. So to me, the fourth graders, the fifth graders, they lost a critical, my guess is maybe they made up that year, but I think it's perfectly reasonable that the third graders did best, that's all. And feel free to disagree,
It's a good theory. I have to go back and unpack it. So, again, I think there's an aspect on what does it mean by doing best, right? Because I kind of go back to moving the systems, and when you look at our data, we don't have any schools that are really hitting it out of the park, you know? So, Maine Dunstable, for a couple of years, we're close to that 50% proficient, and then the following year, in 2024, it was down at 40%. But
I guess I was thinking more about fourth, fifth being less proficient, lower numbers than the third graders, that's all.
well, and they only
Regardless of
test.
school.
Yeah, but they only test 1 year, right? So they're not testing like in ELA and math. They're not testing every year. So in science, they only get tested, once in elementary school, once in middle school.
ELA, though.
In ELA.
I'm talking about the
okay.
ELA.
Oh,
If
I
you
thought
went,
you were still
not
in
science, sorry, no.
I thought you were
But
still
I
in
was-
science.
No,
yeah.
I'm sorry, just ELA. I was just, and you just think about learning to read is so critical. No, I'm not diminishing the value of science. I'm just thinking,
Yeah.
you can't read your science book, so.
Yeah.
So do you know what I'm saying about ELA?
Yeah, no,
If you
I
can-
do.
I just think it's very predictable that
Yeah.
those, because
And the other aspect of, even with the third graders, sometimes it's the first time students are actually being assessed on a computer, right, independently. So you would think sometimes it's a little lower in fourth grade, they're used to it, but these students, yeah, to your point, have been in school post-COVID. So, excellent. I'm going to turn it over to Principal T-Boom, talk a little bit about M-Class data.
I think there. Oh, look at, it's my only slide.
What's that?
It's my only slide. So what you were just talking about, this is basically the data that we're using right now. This is called M-Class DIBBLES, and DIBBLES actually stands for Dynamic Indicators of Basic Early Literacy Skills. So it's an evidence-based assessment tool used to measure foundational literacy skills for students in kindergarten through fifth grade. It identifies students at risk for reading difficulty and guides instructional decisions to support those literacy development. M-Class has some key areas, which include phonemic awareness, the alphabetic principle, which is like sound, symbol, relationship, fluency, comprehension, and vocabulary. These quick assessments allow the teachers to frequently monitor student progress throughout the year and ensure that the students who need that additional support are identified in a timely intervention. So basically, the system generates very much detailed, data-driven insight. This is one piece of data, but obviously if you dig deep, you get into each classroom, each grade level, and data is used. We picked this one to show the data through all the schools. We considered just showing beginning of the year assessment compared to beginning of the year assessment. So if you looked at someone like Amherst Street School, which is the second box on the left, the top one would be the beginning of the year. The bottom red line is the beginning of the year for 24. The top's the beginning of the year for 23. And the two in the middle just kind of show the progression of last year. Does that make sense a little? I know it's hard to see the writing. I was trying to do a copy from it. So what you can kind of see on here is, in most cases, from our beginning of the year 2023 to the middle of year assessment to end of year, you continue to see that growth in student achievement. You'll see that students are making more benchmarks on grade level or even above. So those greens and blues are on grade level or above. The yellow and red are below or highly below grade level or well below. So, using this data, educators can then identify those struggling readers. They implement those targeted interventions because they'll target certain areas. For example, like in first grade, it could be decoding or fluency skills, wherein maybe like fourth grade, we're working more on vocabulary and comprehension, right? So they'll be able to look at those targeted intervention, and then they'll target that student growth, right? And make those informed decisions to improve the outcomes. And the way that we track that student growth is we do 3 assessments a year. So we have the beginning, middle, and end. But then we then hello? Oh. I was done. Then we do what's called progress monitoring, and I think the next slide.
One more.
Did I do it the right way?
One more.
Wrong way?
Advance one more, the other way.
No, this is a progress
This
monitoring.
one. That one.
No, progress monitoring. This was just the progress monitoring to show that, when you start progress monitoring, basically when a student is, I'll go back to this slide, when a student is in below benchmark grade level, we progress monitor students that are below grade level once every 4 weeks, and students that are well below, which is in the red, we do them every other week. And what that data will do will continue to support if those targeted instructions are helping the students progress. And if not, we have those discussions, whether it's team or PLCs, on how we're going to be able to target it even better. And the goal, obviously, is to continue to target those skills and move them to grade level benchmarks. So I guess the big piece to this is, if you'll start to notice, the beginning of the year and the beginning of this year. So when we started to look at that data, so that would be the first line and the last line of each of those kind of rectangles, you'll see that they kind of almost, there's not a lot of decrease in students that are not on grade level. And that would be the goal, if that makes sense. So our goal would be at the beginning of this year that our students going into the next grade level, or they're going to have those skills. And we had some ideas of like why that could be happening. One of the reasons could be that, well, there's several reasons, but one of them suggests that maybe that there are some larger foundational literacy skill gaps that we still need students entering each grade level, particularly, and we've noticed this in the phonemic awareness, decoding, and fluency has been an area. We also would want to consider that summer learning loss that can happen. Obviously, we've heard of that. Another piece that we considered was maybe that enrollment changes where, influx of students or just students transferring from other districts into our schools that just didn't benefit from the same kind of structured interventions that we're doing here in Nashua. And then one area that we did talk a little bit more about was that M-Class has obviously gotten better, right? They reflect on their assessment and become more thorough. And because of that, maybe those improved tools and updated versions of the benchmark have done a better job at kind of identifying those students that need extra help. So that could explain why some students continue to, fall, below grade level. And then, go back to what you were saying, Mr. Claffey, was even that upper grades with the pandemic are still, might have some influence on their foundational literacy skills. So that's our assessment. Do you have any questions?
Just have one question. I know, and I've just started using this in my classroom too. Will we be using, is it the maze for comprehension? Will we be using that, or are we currently using it too? Do you find that helpful?
Last year, and you can agree with me or not, but we did notice that it took some time for the teachers to kind of understand. I believe it's timed, and they had to understand the assessment and know maybe some of their mistakes. But this year, it does help. Yeah, you can give the maze pretty frequently too to check comprehension because it's a list of stories that they can go to, and they just go to the next one, especially in the upper grades.
The other thing I would say is I know that a lot of, keeping in mind that this is one data point, because yes, it's data and data is wonderful, but all students perform differently on assessments such as this. So those are a lot of conversations I know us as principals were having with our staff during our PLCs, when we're talking with families. It's wonderful data, but you have to be cautious with it and remember that sometimes they perform that way on the assessment than maybe what they're doing in front of you. So just keeping that in mind when we do all of these assessments.
I was going to get to it a little later, but ask, in both of their schools, their PLCs are incredible, but if you could just talk about, I was going to talk about it after the ERPs, but really just to that point on how do you use all the data in front of you? How does that, that information drive your PLCs and increase student achievement and create the culture in the school? Either one.
I would say that what's wonderful is that we have this tool, and for our PLCs at Maine Dunstable, we meet once a month before school. And what's nice is the value has been seen by all of our staff members to the point where our reading specialists come to every single one. So that's 6 PLCs a month, when contractually they don't have to, but they see the value in it. Same with our EL team, they also come. Our special educators, they also come because they all benefit from looking at the data. We use that to create their small groups for intervention instruction. It helps to navigate, new things such as the M-Class portal itself, right? Even just going into that and looking at it. And this year, for example, we took the data, myself and the assistant principal, Patty Flynn, and we took each grade level's data, and we were able to put like kids together, even if they weren't in the same class, so that we could help to create those small groups for focused instruction. And it took some pressure off of our teachers. We were able to have them go in and see, okay, wow, you have 2 kids like that, I have 2 kids like that. Why aren't they together? Really working to target that instruction. It's still a lot, but the value is seen by our staff members, and the kids enjoy it because they're seeing their own progress. So PLCs, yes, they can be a lot of work, but you get a lot out of it. We see the progress in our school.
So talking about a lot of work, just the next slide here around our M-class data, and this is from this current year, breaking down the previous slide a little further on students who are in the well below benchmark status or the below benchmark status, and the progression from 2% to 59% is just when we were doing the assessment. So it wasn't the first week of September, we had no kids below benchmark, they just weren't assessed yet. So towards the end of October, you can see we're around 59% of our students are well below benchmark on this assessment, which equates to 1,400 students. And then the below benchmark is around 731 students, and again, broken down by the grade level. What's important here is, like, again, what's the so what? Now that we have this information, what are we going to do about it? And this is where the building teachers and the building principals working with their reading teachers have created almost 2,000 individual reading plans for each student. And it really gets into what's the targeted skill, who's going to provide the intervention, the frequency, the duration. Are we looking at data biweekly or monthly? Were we in contact with the parent or the guardian? And then what's going to be when we meet in 2 weeks or on a monthly basis? Are we meeting progress? And that's always, we have the data, and then it's the implementation and what's the intervention look like. And this also goes hand in hand in tandem with the PLCs, because if you're looking at this many students, it's not one student at a time. And so you might have a whole grade level at Lead Street where you have 80% of the kids who might be on some type of plan with similar interventions. So as Amanda was saying, how are we regrouping kids who might need the same intervention? And that's really important. And again, I think it's important here for the individual reading plans that the parents and the guardians are keenly aware of the interventions that are taking place with their child. There is another plan. This is the one that's shared with the family, but there is another document that goes into much more detail that the teachers are using that might break down the intervention, what does it look like, and the data that's going to be collected. So, and that would be shared in the PLCs. But it's always important, I think, to show what is the data, but the so what? What's the next step? And then really get to that point on how are we looking at the data at the building level on a 2-week or a monthly basis? Are we making progress? And hopefully, as Tanya was saying earlier, that we see reds and yellows turning to blues and greens. And that's the importance of it. So writing these plans creates a lot more urgency, and having those conversations on are we making progress and why are we making progress? And if we're not making progress, why aren't we making progress and what might we do differently? So I think that's really important. Any questions around that? Again, I think it's really that street level data and this M-class and classroom assessments through the PLCs are really going to make that difference and drive that instruction. And I'm going to hand it over to Amanda for a little update on.
I just have one question about that. So are these individual reading plans created for the students that are well below and below, or are they created for everybody?
So
Sounds like it would be a lot of work.
it is a lot of work. It is right now created for the yellow and red.
Okay. Yeah.
But quite honestly, if, we're not there yet. But even in math, I think there should be individual math plans as well. But it could be for every single student, right? And so if you're a student who's already proficient or proficient with distinction, what's your math plan? So it doesn't have to be an intervention, but the acceleration. Because some of it at the end of the day, so this is going to families, but a third or fourth grade student should know what their goal is, right? If I'm having issues with phonemic awareness, I would love for Mr. Posca to say, all right, Mario, today we're working on these skills. This is your goal. The more that I can own, whether even as a K student, then I know I met my target. And it's the same thing for students who are proficient or proficient with distinction. I think we need to give them a little more ownership, empowerment, and agency into their learning so that they're more active in the conversation as opposed to something happening to them. But they should know what their goal is.
Thank you.
So that being said, I'm going to hand it back over to Amanda.
So I'm just going to talk a little bit about CKLA. Last year, as you know, the teachers that were using CKLA were done by choice. It was a pilot. Whereas this year, we're looking at teachers all in, everyone's doing it. So there's a lot of different feelings, reactions, and emotions related to that. So this is just a little bit of what I have heard and other principals have heard about, what's happening in the world of CKLA. So some feedback we've heard is that there's really some engaging content. Some teachers have noted that students are much more engaged, and that's due to what they feel is rich and diverse content in the lessons. It's different, it's new to them, and it's interesting. They find that the lessons are much more structured, so they appreciate having that structure and detailed lesson plans, which can, for some, save planning time. On the opposite side, it can be super overwhelming too, right? When you get a manual that has all of this in it. So that's also something to note. Something that a lot of staff and students like is that there's that integration of literacy, history, science, and the arts all within that one block of time. So they're able to really connect with what they're learning about through literacy, but it's also connected to things that they have an interest in. Some other things that we've heard is that some staff feel that the lessons are moving too quickly, maybe for certain students, and really particularly for those who need additional support. The content again, right? So there's twofold, right? So some staff feel that the content can feel overwhelming. Like I was saying, maybe they feel it's a little bit above the students, but it's rigor, right? We need to offer this to our students, especially, the amount that is covered in 1 year. Some teachers feel like it's too much, or even based on the daily schedule. We have a very strict schedule that we're following with the Department of Justice we worked with, and we did this with EL, we did it with science, we've done it with all departments, and really realizing how much time students need to be in the classroom and really be accessing that Tier 1 instruction. Also, professional development. Some teachers would like more. Some teachers, really rely on that. Whereas you also, just like in the classroom, you have self-starters, self-motivated. They want to do it their own, kind of research it and figure it out on their own. But some things that I try to keep in mind is it is new. And it takes time to fully teach to the rigor that is in this curriculum resource. And then I'm hearing more, and I think a lot of us are hearing, for those teachers who in year 1 were super overwhelmed with it, they're like, wait a minute, this year, I met with a teacher today and she's like, but now I kind of know where I can make it my own. Without getting away from the rigor, I can see where those adjustments are and where they need to be, and they're more comfortable with it. So I think as a district, we need to keep that in mind. We have people at various levels, like we were saying with science. We have that again with CKLA. So it's really, there's a lot to it, but everyone has their own opinion, but there's some really good stuff coming out of it.
Oh, I defer. You're the elementary teacher. Ms. Gilio, of course.
I just as a grandmother of a student in second grade now, I pick him up 3 days a week. When he was in kindergarten, I would, he would get in the car from the school bus, and I would try to ask all those questions that's really going to make your child talk about what happened during school, rather than how was school. Kindergarten, it was, like pulling teeth. And then in first grade, when he was introduced to CKLA, it was like he couldn't wait to get in the car, and he would be bombarding me with things, Grandma, can we go to Egypt this weekend? Or, Grandma, do you know how many bones are in the human body? And just today, we had a whole discussion about Greek mythology in the car. And so the richness of it is really, I know it's a lot of hard work, but he's just loving it and thriving. And I'm sure many of our other students are as well. So thank you all.
Yeah, so I'll just, again, I agree where it's a year later, and we all can talk about how it was rolled out last year and the need of professional development. So I think the teachers are in a better spot, and that's really a tribute to the elementary principals and creating an environment that's safe. They're having a lot of conversations with the teachers, like if what is the scope and sequence, if they need adjustments, it's through those PLCs, and it's really very supportive kind of conversations. And we're having the conversations going back to what's the standard? What are those things that at the end of the year that every second grade, every third grader needs to know and be able to do? And I think that's important. But the culture has kind of changed around the conversation around the implementation of CKLA, quite honestly. And I think that matters. I try to visit schools as often as possible. And so I'm in a lot of the classrooms, and there's things that I still would like to see. I've been talking about it with our elementary principals, where I still think CKLA is too much whole class discussions. So kids can get lost in that conversation of how are you providing formative assessments? How do you know that little Johnny actually learned the learning target that day? And I think that's important. While your grandchild may be highly engaged in that conversation, how does he demonstrate the knowledge and skills that are part of that standard, right? And so is it through group work, individual work, but when there's a lot more of whole class instruction, it's harder to assess and see where kids are at. So, and that's where the where teachers are like, I need to know if Mario made progress today. So can I tweak it a little bit? And I think that's their conversations we're having, where anytime there's a new curriculum that goes in, we talk about fidelity to the program, kind of like the air quotes, right? Where are you? What page? Are you on page 16 on such a day? And so there's a lot of that compliance, but we're really moving towards what are the standards, especially the power standards at grade level. How do we use the resource properly? And then how do we use the data in our PLCs to reinforce the skills that are needed at each grade level. So again, I have to commend our coaches and our building principals for really creating that environment and working with the teachers so that we can have a better implementation of the CKLA. During our February PD day, CKLA will be back to provide 3 more hours of PD for our teachers to help in that implementation as well.
I just was wondering if we approved a new report card a couple months ago, I don't know, recently, and I was wondering, are these progress measures, based, whatever you want to call them, these scores, tests, does the new report card help teachers and reflect that or incorporate that? I can't remember, that's why I'm asking.
Yes, it does. The current report card that we had last year did not come with the same type of expectations that we're doing in Nashua as of, a lot of the new curriculum and standards. So the same language will be used on the report card, and those expectations will be shown there.
So as far as the MCAS test date, I couldn't tell when the third testing date was administered, the third test of the year was administered. I was just wondering, there's going to be 3 report cards or two? So so the last, at least the third test result will be on the final report, or progress made will be on the final report card?
Yeah, so we'll still have the formal report cards, but in that reporting schedule that came out, we're really emphasizing that informal communication. Any of the 2-week progress monitoring, that should be communicated as opposed to just waiting for the report card. The report card often is way too late, and so this is really when you're looking at, again, 2,100 students who are below benchmark, it's really important to do that progress monitoring and have that communication with the family ongoing. And it's in math, science, ELA, or any of the areas, but it is really about that reporting structure of that informal data going back well before the report card. And then we do have a report card subcommittee that wants to make some tweaks to some of that language so it's more accurate kind of going forward as well. And we're talking about that, when that implementation would actually happen. But really what we presented to the committee a couple months ago was really emphasizing and reinforcing that informal so that you would have this data more like that M-class data at the beginning of the year. Parents wouldn't get that information until Thanksgiving. So now with our new structure, like there was more communication going on in September and October. Any other questions? That's
2 weeks till holidays, 2.5? You counting? It's a great, if I'm right, I think Christmas is on a Wednesday, right? Which usually meant the longest break. Is that still, you count it, I'm sure? You deserve it, but it's like 11 days or so. But we'd rather be in class.
So I want to end it on a little bit of a high note today, not that this wasn't a high note. And we have a press release coming out shortly. I shared it with the Board of Education, but Sunset Heights has been acknowledged as one of 2 distinguished schools in New Hampshire. They'll be nationally recognized as well. And I think it's a testament not only to Sunset Heights, but also the work across all the elementary schools, really talking about moving systems, and it's about growth of every student. So, congratulations to Erin Anderson and her team, but also to, I think, every elementary teacher and administrator across the districts, because this has been about moving systems, and we're fortunate enough that Sunset Heights has been recognized, but I think it's a testament to all the work that's happening in Nashua.
Be looking for a motion.
I make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Hi.
Aye. Thank you very much.